What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. One of the things that I think is so important in terms of understanding how our consciousness changes is that there was that expectation when we're undifferentiated in our consciousness that we would have perfect security, that we would just be okay all the time. Now, that's a great thing to strive for, but it's not that you get there by being okay all the time. It's you get there by learning how to deal with not being okay.
Right. And I would have been okay with not being okay, right? Like my friend says, you'll be fine. You'll find another job. It's like, yeah, I don't want to, but yeah, I will.
Well, that's it. See, it's the I don't want to part. That's understandable. Look, it's a hassle and stuff. But once again, my security is not dependent on what's happening. It's on what I do with what's happening to me.
Absolutely.
And that's such an important thing for us to keep in mind. Thank you. And I'm glad you're okay. But you would have been okay even if. See, right. That's what we got to get to. You're okay even if.
Thank you.
Well, look, as those of you know that have been joining us for a long period of time, is that we are going through the 12 steps. This time from a perspective of looking at how the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous promote and help us develop a healthy and authentic self-esteem that is grounded and anchored in humility. We're going to call that a true self-esteem, right? A healthy self-esteem, as opposed to a pseudo self-esteem that's based on a lot of old ideas. We're not going to get into that. Please go to the video archives, listen to some of the previous discussions, especially the discussion Roger had when we kicked off this whole topic of self-esteem. There's some very, very important discussions. As we've kind of gone through the steps, we've fallen into kind of a protocol here. And that Herb Kagan typically starts off the step by giving us an overview, talking about the specific, activity and dynamics of that particular step. Then Roger Andes comes in and relates that step to self-esteem, especially using the work of Dr. Nathaniel Branden. We've been using a lot. The 6 pillars of self-esteem is a good reference for you if you want to continue to follow up on it. Thom Rutledge comes in, and Tom gives us what we call his nutshell wisdom on that particular step, and that's been wonderful. My job is to try to tie all of this into emotional sobriety. And that's what I hope to do tonight, is to tie this step about, making a list of all persons we had harmed and becoming willing to make amends to them into this whole concept and the development of a practice of emotional sobriety. Now, I'll remind everyone that Bill Wilson explicitly stated in step 12, in the 12 and 12, that if we practice these principles of the AA program in our daily lives, that we and those about us begin to find emotional sobriety. The goal of working the steps is to achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve a practice, because you don't get there. It's something that you practice, as Thom Rutledge reminds us of over and over again, which I think is a very important thing to keep mindful of. So I want to first start, as I get into this tonight, by putting this step in the context of what we've been doing, right? Because we've gone through 7 steps before this, and I want to really focus on, pay particular attention to what happens in steps 6 and 7 that's really brought us to step 8. Step 6 was, right, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Now, the first 5 steps have really helped us develop a lot more insight and awareness into who we are and who we're not. And now that we have a good sense of who we are making a commitment, right, to start to clean up some of our behavior. Another way to say it is step 6 is now moving towards becoming what we can be by owning who we are and what we need to do to improve ourselves so that we can develop. And this is what happens in step 7 is we now, step 6 and 7 is about developing the best possible attitude we can have towards our shortcomings. And that is to take responsibility and get busy cleaning them up. But this pivot step is not just a pivot towards the best possible attitude towards ourselves and the issues we need to start to clean up in our life. We're now beginning a pivot towards the best possible attitude towards relationships and towards life itself. In fact, that's what step 8 does, right? So when we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings in step number 7, the first task we're given is, okay, you want to remove your shortcomings? Then make a list of all the people you've harmed and become willing to clean them up. You've got to take responsibility. See, that's one of the things that we're seeing, that the steps are promoting a radical responsibility for your life. You have created your existence. You have created the problems you have. You've created your symptoms. And when we start to own these, then we've got a chance to integrate what we're learning about ourselves so we can grow. Growth does not take place without integration. Integration must happen. And what we said before, a prerequisite to change and growth is acceptance. Now, it's even said this, is that as we look at step 8 here, says this is what Bill says as he starts it off. First, we take a look backward to try to discover where we have been at fault. Next, we make a vigorous attempt to repair the damage we've done. That's what we're going to be doing in steps 8 and 9. And third, having thus cleaned away the debris of the past, we consider how with our newfound knowledge of ourselves, we may develop the best possible relations with every human being we know. The best possible relations with every human being we know. Didn't say the ones you like, the ones that are easy to have a good relationship with. He didn't say that. He said the best possible relationship with every human being we know. You see, to integrate these things we're learning, these concepts, they need to be practiced in all our affairs. It's very important that we bring that kind of consciousness to our life. Now, we go on and we're making this list of all people we have harmed. Now, obviously, the goal of it is to eventually make restitution, right, to other people. But there's also another important benefit that's taking place. And this is where this now interfaces and starts to weave in the emotional sobriety. So listen to what Bill says. After he says that we're doing this to make restitution, he says, it is equally necessary that we extricate, we take out of, right? That we extricate from an examination of our personal relations every bit of information about ourselves and our fundamental difficulties we can. We're going to get back to what are our fundamental difficulties in a minute. Since defective relations with other human beings have nearly always been the immediate cause of our woes, of our troubles, of our emotional disturbances. He says, including our alcoholism. You see, one of the insights I had into this is that my drinking was an attempt to be free from all of this nonsense that I did not know how to unravel. He goes on to say, so no field of investigation could yield more satisfying and valuable rewards, and I'm adding this word, and information in this one. Calm, thoughtful reflection upon personal relations can deepen our insight. Calm and thoughtful, meaning if you're sitting there judging yourself about how terrible you are, you're not calm and thoughtful, folks. You're being judged, you're judging yourself, you're beating yourself up, you're bullying yourself, your should monster is having a field day with you. He says we can go far beyond those things which were superficially wrong with us, like saying I was selfish, to see those flaws, which were basic flaws, which were sometimes responsible for the whole pattern of our lives. Thoroughness, we have found, will pay, and pay handsomely. So what is this fundamental difficulty? What is this basic flaw that ties into the emotional sobriety that Bill is talking about? Well, we get some clue from that by looking at the letter that Thom just wrote. Later, at another point in the letter, I don't think it was read tonight, but he says, I realized my basic flaw was dependence, almost absolute dependence on people and circumstances for my prestige and the like. So what Bill was telling us is that the underlying problem we have is this we turn to our environment for support. We have not grown beyond the stage of environmental support in our emotional development. So we're stuck. We're still looking for things in our environment to make us okay. And with that dependence on those, what he called absolute dependence, and it's not just on people, but it's on circumstances, it's on situations, it's on the economy, it's on, I mean, the list can go on and on and on. What you have, I mean, all of these things, how you look, I mean, my God. Our sense of self is so dependent on so many things that are outside of us. This is our basic flaw. The fact that we demand the environment to be a certain way for us to be okay. The way I have described it before is that we develop a consciousness that says, I'm okay if. I'm okay if I'm this way. I'm okay if I'm that way. I'm okay if you do this. I'm okay if that happens. On and on and on. I'm okay if. By seeing how this emotional dependence, which I'm using synonymously now with environmental support, is really the basic flaw and at the root of all of our problems. Because of that, when we act for ourselves, we act selfishly. When we act for others, we act selflessly in hopes that they will behave and respond in kind to us. We don't do it because that's what we want to do. We do it because we're trying to manipulate our environment to be the way that we think we want it to be, the way we think we need it to be. We are manipulating in all kinds of ways when we are stuck at this level of our development, most of which are outside of our consciousness. You see, we can't say that I'm a manipulator because it wouldn't sit right with you. You wouldn't feel good about that. So you won't let yourself see it. You won't let yourself get honest with yourself in terms of how controlling and how manipulative you are. But we are. And then when things don't go our way, one of our basic flaws is, what do we do when we cannot create this we that we most desperately want? You see, every one of us wants to be loved. We want to belong. We want to be a part of. We want to be accepted. What happens when that doesn't happen? That's part of our basic flaw, is we retreat into a very protective I. And that retreat into protective I now destroys the we And all that's important is the I. I take things personally. I'm looking out for it. I'm reacting. I'm withdrawing. I'm stonewalling. I'm cutting myself off emotionally from you. All kinds of ways I deal with what I'm experiencing that are based on some very, very undifferentiated consciousness and emotional level of development. So as we're making this list of people we're going to make restitution for, we try to see what the patterns are. What has caused trouble in my relationship with my 3 wives? What has caused trouble with my relationship with my friends? How comes those friendships seems to end the way they do? How come I continue to be disappointed that people don't live up to my expectations? See, all of these things are incredibly important for us to become aware of if we're going to now get to work on owning, taking responsibility for our demand for environmental support, and get on with learning how to support ourselves and how to stay connected to a relationship in the way that Bowen talked about. Murray Bowen was the person who brought this idea of differentiation into psychology. And he said, in a well-differentiated person, you act for yourself without impinging on the rights of others. Let me say that again. We are striving, and this is one of the hallmarks of emotional sobriety, to act for yourself without impinging on the rights of other people. Now, this is typically going to be the last discussion of a step, because we've had 4 weeks of it, and actually 5, because Declan filled in for me last week. And Declan's not here tonight, but thank you, Declan. But I want to extend this another couple weeks because I want to talk about how now looking at this pattern of self-hate in our life is so important in step 8 as well. We will be doing that next week. But tonight I wanted to tie in this step with emotional sobriety and the importance of seeing these patterns, seeing the way our habits in our lives and the patterns, so that we can start to become aware of these things, accept that this is what we're doing, and get on with the business of cleaning this stuff up. So I will invite Roger and Tom and Herb in to invite their comments. And then if we have some time, we'll open this up.
I'm going to take it directly, because one of the things I appreciated about Declan's presentation last week is he brought in the self-esteem pillar of self-assertiveness related to step 8. And while making a list of, is not necessarily the first idea of self-assertiveness that's going to occur to a lot of people, it certainly is an act, from my perspective, of self-assertiveness. So I wanted to read a little bit from the 6 pillars, because it ties so well into what you just said about learning how to act for ourselves without impinging on the rights of others. Now, and talking about self-assertiveness, that particular pillar of self-esteem, Nathaniel Brandon writes, self-assertiveness means honoring my wants, needs, and values. Now hear that, my wants, needs, and values, and seeking appropriate forms of their expression in reality. Its opposite is that surrender to timidity that consists of consigning myself to a perpetual underground where everything I am lies hidden or stillborn, to avoid confrontation with someone whose values differ from mine, or to please, placate, or manipulate someone like you were just describing, or simply to belong. Self-assertion, and this is the point about acting for ourselves without acting against others or impinging on the rights of others, as you often say it, Al. Self-assertion does not mean belligerence or inappropriate aggressiveness, which for me are certainly at the core of the harm I've done to people a lot of the time, right? It does not mean pushing to the front of the line or knocking other people over. It does not mean upholding my own rights while being blind or indifferent to everyone else's. It simply means the willingness to stand up for myself to be who I am openly, and to treat myself with respect in all human encounters. It means the refusal to fake my person, who I really am, in order to be liked. And then he goes on to talk about authenticity and so on. A couple other points he makes that I want to highlight. Sometimes people who are essentially dependent, which is what you've just been talking about, Alan, excessive emotional dependency is how I think of it, and fearful, choose a form of assertiveness that is self-destructive. It consists of reflexively saying no when their interests would be better served by saying yes. Their only form of self-assertiveness is protest, whether it makes sense or not. While healthy self-assertiveness requires the ability to say no, it is ultimately tested not by what we are against in our life, but by what we are for.
I like that.
And I want to say that again. While healthy self-assertiveness requires the ability to say no, it is ultimately tested not by what we are against, but by what we are for. A life that consists only of a string of negations is a waste and a tragedy. Self-assertiveness asks that we not only oppose what we deplore, but we live and express the values of who we are. In this respect, it is intimately tied to the issue of integrity. So I wanted to add those themes, Alan, to what
it's highly relevant, Raj. I think it's such a nice fit. And that's the power of this. You see, what Bill Wilson captured in doing this work had so many different roots into some sound psychological concepts, right? I mean, it's so deeply rooted. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure. Thank you.
Herb, you want to take it on next, or Tom, do you want to jump in?
Well, Herb could go too, but I just want to say that based on what we just talked about, is I for quite a while was leading a wasteful and tragic life, and it was because I had talking about standing against things. I had a therapist one time that said I was always mad at this therapist because she was very smart, and it's like and she was unaffected by my not appreciating her. But she said, you know, Tom, you define yourself against everything. You know, she said, and what she just said to get to me about that was what she said, that's the same as just being controlled. You're just being controlled. You know, it's like you're not making any choices on your own. You're not thinking independently. I don't remember if she said all that exactly, but that's what I learned from it. Is because, you know, I just had that reflex rebellion thing. It's like, you know, it was just, you know, hey, it wasn't just here's the color blue. Well, I'm going to think a different color. It was here's the color blue, and I say fuck you. Yeah. You know, it's like, you know, well, why? I was just showing you the damn color. So anyway, that was my wasteful and tragic life, and I think I'm doing better now. So I'm just gonna run. My newest plan here is to do some bullet points. I'm gonna do some bullet points based on what Alan was saying, and probably some of what Roger was saying. Number one, step 8 and step 9, they go together for me a lot, and it's like it is preparation for becoming a full-grown adult for me. It's about stepping up to being an adult that's when it is about accepting responsibility for the harm that I have done, without defending, without making excuses, or without crumbling. I've talked about this before. Of some of the lessons I've learned in my marriage about being a full-grown adult is that, you know, when I can stand and listen to someone tell me how I have hurt them, and I have been the cause of that hurt, and I neither counter aggress nor crumble. You know, I don't become pitiful, or I don't become an asshole. It's like that's a hard place to stand. It's I was working with a client today that was having to do that very thing in her marriage, and it is a powerful thing, and it leads to ironically, tremendous self-respect and integrity. And that's what we're doing when we're preparing, when we're making a list of people we have harmed. We're owning it. We're becoming adults. We're owning this stuff. And I think it's the preparing part is also and I like the fact that it's not just one big step, that you don't just go in there and start making amends. You find people who get into the program right away and they want to start right there, and you go like, no, this is going to take some time. But yeah, to me, it's about really being prepared to be realistic about what it means to do that. It's no small task not to even internally, not to counter aggress or defend or crumble. In that we need to be able to do this. We need to prepare in step 8 and to put this out there actively in step 9, because we're ready to stand strong as an adult. We don't even have to be right. People may respond in ways that we don't like, and that's so important that we understand that we are not in charge of how they're going to respond. Everybody, we don't do these the 8th and 9th steps. We don't do them so people will be impressed with us. How cool are you that you're making it? It's like, no, we do this with people that basically, if they're being honest, sometimes it's like, well, I appreciate what you're saying, because buddy, you really did fuck some things up for me. And instead of, oh, I'm so happy that you said that to me. It's like, sometimes that may be, but it's like, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing is we're owning it. And that to me is that adult part. Yeah, and the last thing I'll just say is I've had the same thing I've just said. This step and 9 are about self-respect every bit as much as it's about respecting the people we have harmed. And it's nobody could have ever, I don't think anybody can ever have described to me what the feeling of adding this to my practice of being this responsible, so that I am good at acknowledging when I have fucked up, and I will own it, and I will take responsibility for it. And when there's something I can do to because the word amend means to mend, to change, not to apologize. When I can do something to make things better, I will do that. It's one of the best outcomes of all of my work in 12 steps. I feel good about it. How's that for articulate? I say this is good. I say this step is good.
You all should do it.
He's a good Texas boy. He's a good Texas boy.
I think, do I do it or do I not? Do I think I do it? Okay, got it.
My name is Herb. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. And Alan, I was struck by several things that everybody said, actually, but the emphasis, and you may have been conscious of it, but it was, for me, maybe because it's like selective attention, I'm really focused on consciousness. And you mentioned it several times. And that's what step 4 did for me, an inventory of myself. For the very first time, I became conscious of my thoughts and my feelings, but especially my behavior and my values and my beliefs. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier or some other time, I was just horrified and embarrassed. But you said of who we are and who we are not. I mean, that was such an important thing. I had some delusions about who I was, and the truth was the opposite of it, that in fact, and that was very embarrassing. I see step 4 and 8 as inventory of myself in step 4, but inventory of the impact of my behavior on other people. And that was, again, very embarrassing and horrifying for me to see for the very first time that people were not furniture, moved in and out of my life based on my needs and my pleasures. And even the ability to articulate that almost made me stutter to recognize that is in fact, that was the truth. You used the word pivot. It's a great word for the turning that takes place, but then you put steroids on it, and you said radical pivot. And I know that we talk about rigorous honesty, but I've used the term of radical honesty to the root of it. And it's such a powerful experience. And that's the whole point of, from my standpoint, of these two inventories, was to get a sense of the exact nature of where it's coming from and who I am, and then the impact on other people. It really began softening me up that, in fact, I was flawed at a level that I couldn't see. And you've heard me say that many times. And Bill, and I'm focused on this word also recently, in addition to the word consciousness, which I believe has come out of the work that we're doing here and the background and the resources that you all refer to, is partnership. To live in partnership with myself, to live in partnership with other people. I mean, that was a very foreign concept to me. Oh, I could be nice and mutually respectful, but partnership, and you really made a point of that, not just partnership with the people in your family or the people in your work or the people that you like, partnership with humanity, with not as a global term, but as individuals. I'm still not comfortable with it, but I'm very open to that. That's a healthy vision. All of these kinds of inventories, because I've, in my workshops, trying to help people plumb the depths of it, I've discovered that setting up the vision of the alternative, and you talked about the negative and the positive, I think it was here earlier. And so if they have this list of negatives in the inventory, or this negatives in terms of their relationships with other people, even though you don't think it, you don't want it, you don't feel it, to set up the vision of the opposite as the possible model or aspiration, to at least encompass that it's desirable to perhaps move in that direction. That's been life-changing for me. You talked about step 6 and 7. I mean, those were the steps, and Tom, you talked about the change really began. The change not only in the behavior, but the change in the thoughts and the inclinations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and the one term that everybody's talked about, and is freedom. I'm so focused. That's the point of all of this, is a life of freedom, certainly from addiction. I mean, that's the minimum guarantee, but freedom from the burden of environmental support. That's atomic. That's nuclear.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. We would have never thought of it that way, right? Had we started to not dig into this letter like you and I have, when we started this work, that it's so interesting. As we were digging, so much got revealed to us in terms of all of this stuff, even like this whole discussion about self-esteem and the steps. It's so wonderful to see all these different dimensions, isn't it?
Right. Yeah.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved, the forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. The first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. We're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.